If you would, go ahead and grab a songbook in front of you. We're going to be singing number 450 in your hymnals. Number 450, Nearer, My God, to Thee. We'll be singing on verses 1, 2, 3, and 4 of number 450. Nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee, e'en though it be a cross that raiseth me. So I'm going to stop right there. I apologize, guys. Nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee, e'en though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my songs shall be nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. Though like a wanderer, the sun gone down, darkness be over me, my rest a stone. Yet in my dreams I'd be nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. There let the way appear, steps unto have. All that Thou sendest me in mercy give. Angels to beckon me nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. Or if on joyful wing cleaving the sky, sun, moon, and stars forgot, upward I fly, still all my song shall be nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee.
Hi, I'm Brent Price, John's nephew, and on behalf of Joe Nell and all the rest of the nieces and nephews, we want to thank you for coming here to honor John Price and his life. 1 John says that those who say they live in God should live their lives as Jesus did. I believe another translation says that we should walk in the same way that he walked. There are several aspects of John's life that show that he was walking that walk. Through his service to others, including his family, and the disciplined way that he led his life and sought to teach that discipline to his boys. To borrow a line from John's obituary, John served his family, his country, his church, his community, and his college with distinction. If you'll permit me, I'm going to use John's obituary to introduce each of the speakers that will help us honor and identify John Price, the brother, the athlete, the teacher and coach, the businessman and community servant, and the husband that adored Jonelle for all these many years. But before I get too serious, I want to point out that John had been known to play a prank or two. My father, Wallace, was John's closest sibling in age. And over the years, the stories of their antics kind of melded together to the point that I don't really know if John or Wallace was the one that jumped off the garage with their sister's umbrella to turn it inside out, or which one of them threw the hand crank through their sister's boyfriend's car radiator when it wouldn't start and tried to patch it with chewing gum. My entire life, my dad always told me that he was the innocent one, that John was always getting him in trouble. Yet even as dementia was taking its toll, John would still assure me that his older brother, Wallace, was always the cause of his troubles. John Leonard Price died September 14th, 2023. He was born in Rich Pond, Kentucky on May 12, 1933, to the late William Robert Price and Jimmy Bell Stanley Price. He was also preceded in death by his siblings, James Robert Jim Price, Maddie Sue Davis, Mary Florence Gott, Matilda Ann Tilly Rankin, Ernest Stanley Price, Willie Zelma Z. Stewart, Wallace Ezekiel Price, and William Wayne Bill Price. I've asked three cousins to give you a short story about John and their mother. First up is Cookie Davis Tucker, daughter of Sue, then David Stewart, son of Z, and Mary Rankin Dam, daughter of Tilly.
John introduced me, and I am Maddie Sue's daughter. Maddie Sue was the oldest sister, and she was born on the farm on the Rockville Rich Pond Road, and all the children were born there. Well, when John was born, my grandmother died. He was about 8 hours old at the time. Now, the Potter family lived next door. Now, what was unusual is that the Potter family were African American, but the children didn't know anything about segregation, and so there was a lot of playing back and forth between the boys. When John was 6, he was staying with my mother and daddy in Rockville, and Dr. Moss came. Many of the older ones remember Dr. Moss, and he examined John, and then he took Mother into another room to talk to her. Well, John thought that was suspicious, so he scooted over to the door to listen. And Dr. Moss said, "I think it's polio. He may walk again, but he'll never run." Well, John was listening, and he thought to himself, well, I will run too. So then he went to school, and in about 5th grade, he started playing basketball. Miss Briggs was the teacher, principal, and coach at the Rich Pond Elementary. And she would load these boys in her car, take them around the neighborhood, and they would play their games, and then she'd come back to the school in Rich Pond and drop the kids off. Well, John ran home, which was about 2.5 miles. Papa didn't much like John playing basketball. He was a farmer, and he wanted his son to help him with farming. And he was always saying to John, "You spend too much time with that ball." Well, that ball earned him a full ride scholarship. And the first week that he went, he didn't realize that he needed to bring his own sheets and towels. Well, he and another guy were in the same situation. So John had the idea to go upstairs where they stored the extra blankets, take the covers off of the blankets, mattresses. John took the covers off those mattresses, and he and that boy used those as their sheets that first week when they could come home to family and get some more. After his college and his Army stint, he came back to Kentucky to coach. First he went to Richardsville, had a successful year, and then he came to Franklin Simpson, where he built and had a successful career. One night in the not-too-distant past, John and Joe had gone to a funeral for one of the Potter family. And while he was over there, this auntie said that she was tired and she wanted to go home. Well, her nephew told her that he couldn't take her home right then because there were many people wanting to talk with him. So John asked, well, where does she live? And it was Auburn, and he said, well, that's sort of on my way home. I'll be happy to take her. Well, she wasn't sure about this. She didn't know who that man was, and he was big and he was white and tall. So the nephew said, well, that's Mr. Willie's son. Oh, okay, well, that was all right. And on the way home, they'd gotten almost to Auburn, and she asked, did your mother die when you were born? And he said, yes, ma'am. She said, well, I was the one to give you your first bath. And that's a little history. My mother decided that I would be the history person when I was preschool, and she would say, remember, we're kin too. And so now you've had your history lesson in the Price family.
I'm David Stewart, and my mother was John's sister, Willie Z. As you heard, Wallace and John were known for mischievous acts, and my mother, to hear it from her, was the recipient of most of that. So she had it. There was one particular time when she had the opportunity to get back, and so you've probably seen it. They're popular around 4th of July. Those little poppers that you throw down and snap. Well, apparently back in the day, they had ones that were a lot more powerful, right? And so she and my dad were in Franklin in the small house when they used to live here, visiting, and she would notice John's routine. And somewhere during the day, she noticed his routine. She slipped into the restroom, and she put this big old firecracker between the toilet seat and the toilet. And John, doing his normal routine, his daily constitutional, which for some reason she always said was preceded by, I need to go see a man about a dog. And so he walked into the restroom, sat down, and that thing exploded, in which my mom said he came out holding his pants up with his eyes as big as saucers, and she said she took great delight. So.
I'm learning a lot about Uncle John today. My name's Mary Rankin Dam. I'm Matilda Price's daughter, Tilly, which means I'm related to a lot of you in this room, a lot of Price relations. John was my mom's little brother, so he was my uncle. I have a couple of memories of this remarkable man that I want to share with you. Uncle John has always been, of course, in my family, and Aunt Jo and Uncle John weren't geographically close. I grew up in Monticello, Kentucky, but we did see each other each Thanksgiving in Rich Pond on Papa's farm, and then later in Franklin for Thanksgiving, and that was when I learned to get in front of Uncle John at the food line for dinner. Uncle Wally told me to do that. When my sister Ann and my brother Chilton and I were children, Aunt Jo and Uncle John sometimes came to Christmas at our house in Monticello. And I can remember one Christmas when Ann and I were relegated to the rollaway bed. You remember those? Rollaway bed in the basement. So the grown-ups could have the real beds. And we were sent to bed, we were children, we were sent to bed so that Santa could come and bring the good loot, right? So Mom and Dad kept shushing us because we were giggling and talking and making a lot of noise. We couldn't go to sleep. They kept shushing us. And we didn't stop because we were so excited until we heard these heavy footsteps approaching the basement door. And the basement door opened, and Uncle John said, "Don't make me come down there." And it was like shocked silence for the rest of the night. He did his job. But the best thing is he had great timing in career choices, at least where Ann and I were concerned. When we were in high school in Monticello, Uncle John was the basketball coach at Franklin Simpson High School. And he had a miniature golf course. And the high school boys liked to hang out with him. So many boys. So many boys. So Ann and I visited Aunt Jo and Uncle John a lot when that was going on. And it worked out for me because I got to attend the Franklin Simpson prom with Stretch Hendricks, who's here, I think. There he is. There he is. So, and he came to my prom in Monticello, so we got to renew prom date memories today. Aunt Jo and Uncle John were good hosts. They were always having us to their home for Thanksgiving. It was good to be their niece. Good people. They expressed their love and their support. They showed up to weddings. They showed up to graduations. They showed up to sadder moments when we said goodbye to someone. And I just was reflecting on how to describe Uncle John. And it's just, he was a good, kind man, honest man. And I was blessed to have him in my life. And we miss him already.
Well, as Cookie told you, John graduated from Warren County High School in 1952, and he went on to receive a basketball scholarship with Middle Tennessee State College. His coach, Charlie Greer, called John the finest 6'3" pivot man in Middle Tennessee history. John's athletic career spanned 7 years at Middle Tennessee, and it's not that it took him 7 years to graduate. He had a little military work in the middle of that. During his freshman and sophomore seasons, he developed a reputation as a sharpshooter. Able to shoot with either hand, he shot over 50% from the field each season. At the time he finished his playing career at Middle, his 1,215 career points were third most by a Blue Raider. 3-time most valuable player and twice named team captain, John was all VSAC and all OVC. At the conclusion of his sophomore year, he went into the military and spent 2 years in Germany. There he further honed his basketball skills by playing in more than 70 games and making the all-service team. He then returned to MTSU, graduated in 1959, and was inducted into Middle's Basketball Hall of Fame in 1984. John established a school record for single-game scoring with 36 points against Union University as a freshman. Upon graduation, he was in the top 3 in 7 scoring categories and is still number 1 in most free throws made in a career. Of those 7 categories, most points in a game, most points in a career, John is in the top 20, still. In 1958, he led the team in scoring. He's also in the top 10 in free throws made in a game, free throws made in a season, and free throws made in a career. He's in the top 5 still in free throws attempted in a game, season, and career. John was very good about keeping up with people. He made a lot of phone calls. I think that was part of his daily routine. He had certain people he would call every day or every week to check on. And after my father died, he would call me on Saturdays occasionally just to check in. And one of those calls, we would talk about his career or whatever. And he told me that in the middle 60s, or the late 60s, that the Middle, I knew the Middle was in there somewhere, that the Middle athletic director contacted him and asked John if he would be interested in the head coaching job. John asked if his good friend and teammate Jimmy Earl was up for the job, and when they told him yes, he said, "No, I don't want it." So Jimmy got the job, and later he asked John if he'd be his assistant. I think it was his recruiting assistant was what he was wanting. Today, as you know, it's not uncommon for a college basketball assistant to make 6 figures. John turned down the job as an assistant when he found out that he'd be taking a pay cut from his Kentucky teacher's salary. He went on to teach and coach basketball at Richardsville High School 1 year. John and Jonelle moved to Franklin in 1960, where they made their home for over 55 years. He coached, was a teacher, and later assistant principal at Franklin Simpson High School until 1973, when his good friend, Howard Gray, who had opened Franklin Insurance Agency, invited John to become his partner. He stayed there until his retirement in 1995. Howard Gray's brother-in-law, Mark Riggins, played for John, as well as Rob Matthews and Donnie Bland. They're each going to share a little bit about Coach, and I'm sure some of his blue line discipline.
Mary, I may have been one of those boys who was hanging around the putt-putt golf course. I think I probably was. I first met John in 1960. They had just moved to Franklin. And my sister, my mother, and I had just moved to Franklin also. And I wanted to play football. I was so excited to be able to play football in Franklin. I had a problem, though. I couldn't even figure out how to get the uniform on. A farm boy doesn't put on a football uniform very often, and so it was a difficult transition. And I was late to the first practice. John was the coach. And I heard this great sound coming out of this voice of a man that was bigger than life to me at that particular point as a freshman, all green, not knowing what was going to happen to you. He said, "Get over here, son. Get on this sled. I want you to push this sled." So I pushed that sled all day. That was all I did, was push the sled. Well, as we were leaving, the team was leaving the field, John walked up beside me and he said, "Did you enjoy that?" Well, how do you answer that question? And my answer probably was, not particular. He said, "Well, I'm going to tell you 2 things. Number 1, pushing that sled every day in practice is all you're going to ever do. So how glamorous is that for your career in football? And the second thing he said, oh, by the way, you'll never play in a game." I said, okay. He dashed my hope of glamour as a football star at Franklin. But he said to me, "If you come by the gym tomorrow, I'll give you a brand new pair of high-top Chuck Taylor basketball shoes." My eyes lit up. I got there early the next day, went to his office, and true to his word, he gave me my new Chuck Taylors. I was so proud of my shoes, so proud. And one of the things that made them so great was they had blue toes. Now, there's only the basketball players in here who realize what blue toes meant, and it took me a year to figure it out. Those shoes had 2.5 pounds in the soles of the shoes that made them 5 pounds heavier than a normal shoe. Now, there's many stories about John Price when visiting teams would come to Franklin, and there's always one player who'd forget their shoes. he was more than happy to give them a pair of shoes and loan them a pair of shoes that had a blue toe. My career lasted 2 hours. But I look back over that and say that was a turning point in my life. I've told that story to John many, many times, and I thanked him for being a father figure to me at that time when I really needed a father figure. Now, I would like all players who played for John, managers, cheerleaders, anybody who's here to stand up, please. All right, we're getting a few of them here. That is good. That is good. Now I want you to remain standing. Remain standing. Okay? To play ball with John, you had to follow his rules. He was full of rules. He had a lot of them. He had 11 of them. Now, why 11? Why not 10? 10 commandments, something like that. But no, he had rules. And without these rules, we came to the conclusion our fate was no telling what it would have been if we had not have had rules to follow. And I've heard many of you, while I've been here this week, say that type thing. I'm going to go through some of these rules for you. Because y'all haven't heard these rules in a while, have you? Donnie, you haven't heard them in a long time, have you? Okay. No player shall use any form of tobacco. Not a bad rule, is it? Not bad. No player shall drink any alcohol beverage. There was no trips to be made to the Tennessee line. There shall be a curfew. Now notice the words he uses. He uses the word shall. That's a biblical word. And it means it's a command. You don't have any choice in the matter. And you guys didn't have, and none of us had a choice in the matter. There shall be a curfew. This was the third rule. 9 o'clock before game days. 9:30 on all of the weekdays. 12 o'clock on weekends. 10 o'clock on Sunday. That was the rule. I asked my mother many times, did John Price ever call to check on me? She never answered me one time. And I know he did. I know he did. Here's rule number 4. All players, now this is just not some, that's all players, are not to associate with girls on the day of a game. Now the word is associate. You remember that stretch? You didn't associate with women on the day of a game, did you? Next rule, hats are to be worn at all times before and after school when the player is outside. Now that meant off season and on season, I'm assuming. So we walked around school all the time carrying a hat. Now, I have here some hats that I would like for somebody. Would you come and hand out these hats to people who are standing around? Would you give one to Jonelle? Or let Rob over there. He knows everybody. That's rule number 5. Hats are to be worn at all times before and after school. All times. Every player, this is rule number 6. Now, John got a little legal here. He said every player is responsible for each other player. Therefore, that sounds like a lawyer talking, a player is required to report the breaking of any rule by any teammate. You had to snitch on your buddies, okay? If a player does not report any breach of the rules, he is just as guilty as the original offender. So John had his rule pertaining to, if I saw you doing something wrong, I am to report you. Here's one of my favorite. All junk foods are prohibited, especially, I don't know why he hated popcorn. Popcorn, candy, and in all capitals, Cokes, C-O-K-E-S. He hated people that drank Cokes. We could not drink Cokes. No player shall use vulgar language in the dressing room or on the floor. Not a bad rule there. Players should be dressed neat and have a clean haircut. Boy, John would have a horrible time in today's environment watching basketball players. Now, this next rule became the Gary Ferguson rule. Gary, raise your hand back there. There's Gary. What's the rule, Gary? Pool rooms are off limits. I guess John thought there's going to be some bad things happening in those two pool rooms over there on the east side of the square. Final rule. Any broken rules will be dealt with Coach Price and Coach Gray. There could be no other judge. You didn't have much of a defense for yourself if you got caught breaking any of these rules. So, it's confession time. If you never broke one of his rules, you can sit down. Never broke one of his rules. But if you did break one of his rules, you're going to have to stand up. Let's reverse that. If you basically broke some of his rules, please have a seat. Now, I figured all of you would sit down. I want to take you inside a basketball game real quick, if I can do that. Timeouts in basketball games were always very interesting with John. If the opposing team called a timeout, things were relatively calm. But if John called a timeout, you better watch out. You better watch out. The idea was we never sat down like teams do now when there's a timeout. We always stood up and we created a circle around John. And the idea there was you did not want to be in the inner circle. You were late getting to the huddle and you were outside that. Because John had a very unique way of getting your attention. He had that big old hand of his. He would grab you by the shirt, pull you close to him, and he always had these old sharp fingernails. And so you did not want to be close to him during timeouts. Did not. It took Rick Jones 6 months to figure that out. We'd go to the shower room and say, Rick, what's all scars on your chest here, buddy? Yeah, well, that's Coach Price. One thing you did not want to be at halftime was a clipboard. You did not want to be a clipboard. He had all these statistics that guys would come in with, and we would know who's doing good and who's doing bad, and man, you were going to catch it right there at that point. Practices were also very interesting. He believed that practice should be harder than the game. Play like you practice. That is a true statement, not only in basketball, but in our life also. He wanted us to believe, thank goodness, we have a game tonight and we do not have to go through practice. Games were easier to us than practice. During the practice session, we'd be out on the floor a little earlier than everybody else, doing some goofy stuff, shooting balls from midcourt and doing things that we knew we would never get away with in front of him. But they had a little coach's office over there, and when that door opened and he walked out on that floor, you could hear nothing but basketballs going bing-a, 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 bing, 15 of them. And he had control at that particular moment. If you ever notice any of the pictures out here of him, he wore blue pants. And the pants were always too short. And they were way up his knees, like what I would call paddle pushers, okay? And they were blue. He wore them the first day I met him in 1960, and when he'd walk out of that office every day, he always had on those paddle pushers like that. He would reach in the back of his pocket and pull out a little card. Out of his little blue pants, pull out this little card. And on that card would be the practice order and exactly what time different drills were going to happen. We knew exactly what was going to happen. And we knew that for the next 2.5 hours, the information on that little card was going to make our life miserable. I mean, 100% miserable. He was also a man who knew fundamentals of the game called basketball. he taught us fundamentals. And it enabled many of us to go to the next level and even to the next level because of the fundamentals that he took. An interesting thing that I had forgotten about, but Robbo told us the other day, we never took water breaks during practice. Never. 2.5 hours. He never would allow us to go get water. But he would give us an old salt pill and drink that water, and I don't know if he thought that was going to replenish all the salt we had in our body or not, but that was it. Close to the end of the practice, he would blow a whistle, and he would say in a very loud voice, "Give me 5 on the court who want to play. Give me 5 on the court who want to play." He was looking for the first 5 to get out there on that court to run a fast break drill. And that drill, basically, here we were walking around with 2.5 pounds on each foot. Then he would put on ankle braces on it that put another 2 pounds on each foot. So we were running fast break drills all the time with extra weight on our legs like that. So give me 5 on the court who want to play. And everybody would rush out there, and he would check 5, and we'd start running these drills. If I mentioned the name to you of Paul Harris, you probably think about John Price. Paul passed away. When did he do it, John?
About almost 7 years ago.
7 or 8 years ago. Great man. Paul was responsible for naming the Blue Line Reunion. And John made very famous the blue line on the basketball court. A rectangle 50 feet by 94 feet. And if practice wasn't going well up to that, him deciding that, he was the sole determiner of that. If they weren't going well, you could hear that whistle blow, and he would say, "Get on that blue line. Get on it." And to quote Paul Harris, I remember that for the next 10 to 15 minutes, running from blue line to blue line of that gymnasium was going to change your attitude, or you are not playing the next game. That's how important the blue line became. Road trips. I know I'm going long. Road trips, those blue buses. We'd come out in our little blue blazers, little khaki pants, little blue tie that they gave us and everything. You had better not be late to get on that bus. You better not. You better not come on that bus without your hat. And you better not even think about coming on that bus unless you had all your equipment. And I have made that mistake at times. You weren't playing. We always sat on the same seat. John had me and Jimmy Hunter on the same seat right behind John and Howard Gray. There was no talking on the bus to the game. None. You didn't say a word. If you lost, there was no talking coming back from the game. But if you won, you could whisper a little bit and get away with him. John taught us a lot of lessons. He taught us to never quit. Have a love for what you do. Respect those around you. Never forget your family and who you represent. This was his creed. John was to a lot of people in the Blue Line Reunion larger than life, and Howard was also. Charlie Gregory wrote, Charlie played football here and graduated in 1967. At Franklin Simpson, no matter the sport in which we were involved, all coaches had the same expectation of us. In those days, they were larger than life. As I look back, they're still larger than life. That was written by Dr. Charlie Gregory, who played football here. And he became a Methodist, can you believe that? A Methodist member of that church, but his school he was at was a Catholic school called Benedictine University in Chicago, Illinois. He was the president of that school, and he just retired, and he may move back to Franklin, Kentucky. John Price is in heaven today, looking for some of his players. He's looking. He has a whistle around his neck. And guess what he's wearing? He's wearing those Franklin Simpson blue cutoff pedal pushers again. He's looking for a gold street that is 50 foot wide and 94 feet long. What is the size of a basketball court? And I don't know if he's going to ask to paint blue lines on it. I don't know, but he probably will not ask and just say, I'm going to paint blue lines. And he's going to blow a whistle. And that whistle, after he blows it, he says, give me 5 on the court who want to play. That's John Price. John, thank you for all you've done for me. Fond memory I have is watching a freshman walk across the gym floor without taking off their shoes. The floor to John Price at Franklin Simpson High School was holy ground, and you did not walk on it unless you had basketball shoes on. Many memories. You always had to be prepared with John for his handshake. He could put you on the ground pretty easily, so I was always getting ready for that handshake when I got it. Have many memories, many sad ones, some sad ones, many happy ones. I made a decision somewhere during one of our visits that I realized he'd become more than a coach. Even though we were miles apart, he had become a good friend. And that's when I started calling him John, and not Coach Price. I remember going to his home many times and scratching the belly of some old mangy dog that you guys had there in the house that he brought in. And those were happy moments. Those were happy moments. I was falsely accused by many people of being a very dirty basketball player, with sharp elbows and mean. Guess where I learned all that? You know where I learned all that, from John Price. Thank you, Jonelle, for giving us the opportunity to take one more trip from blue line to blue line at 94 in memory of our good friend and our coach, John Price. He basically implanted in our lives, each one of us, through his rules and his creed, to make us better men. Thank you.
This is truly an honor. To be here. I tell you, this is a hard deal, but Coach Price, if it had not been for him, there's no way I would be here now. I wouldn't even graduate from high school. And living next door to him was a great thing. I got to hear a lot of these stories, and I can tell you they're 100% true. From his standpoint of it, Mark got up, did a great job. In fact, all of this stuff that I have written, he covered for me. Okay, so I don't need that. There's a few things that I would like to go over with. I remember, Ms. Price, when you lived on North Main Street. Gary and I was talking about it earlier. At Christmas time and 2 or 3 times a year, you'd have the team there to eat. That house was so small, we're trying to figure out how you got all of us in there, fed us, and got us back to the game. But we looked so forward to coming and doing that. The other thing is that we knew that Coach Price and Miss Price loved us. They did. They were always there, and anytime you needed something, it was good. I remember a story, though, and I don't know whether Gary remembers this one or not. We were freshmen, I guess it was, and we were at Richardsville, And there was a guy that Hendricks that scored about 40 points a ball game, but at halftime we were behind, and I was on JV. I wasn't playing, but that's when Lee Steers and Jerry Bradley and some of those guys were playing. Coach came down and kicked this trash can. It was one of those wire mesh trash cans, and it just folded up around his foot. And him and Coach Gray spent the rest of that halftime trying to get that trash can off his foot. Now, if you think any player laughed during that period of time, we were all biting our tongues, our lips, and everything else to keep that from happening. Now, I've often wondered if Coach ever bought them another trash can or not, but I'm sure that he made amends for that and all. My wife told me to go slow and all that type stuff when I'm speaking here, because I've done some college classes, and whenever I got through, I said the old man was pretty good, wasn't he? And she'd say, "You're kind of obnoxious." So if I'm a little obnoxious today, I'm sorry for that and all. But whenever Coach Price was the first basketball coach in Franklin to take a team to the state tournament. Okay? I was the first coach to take a girls team. Coach Price coached that team, because we did. I could call him up and I'd say, "Coach, I can't get that player to cover the elbow. What do I need to do?" And his comment was me. I'll never forget this one. "Tell them to get there." And that's what I did. In fact, Mark talked about the blue line. The blue line, whenever I was coaching at Franklin, of course, the blue line, you're going to run the blue line. Well, I went to Russellville to coach. Their colors are black and gold. I'd blow the whistle. I say, "Get on the blue line." And all. There's one last thing that I would like to go over that Coach Price gave us. And he taught us that it didn't take a lot of anything to be good, except to work hard and good effort, and to believe in what you do. I have no doubt that Paul Harris and Coach Price and Jones and some of the others that are in heaven right now, they're looking down here and laughing and at me. They're saying, "How in the world did Coach ever get Robbo in the pulpit of a church?" Okay? But I'm here, and now, the other day, if you don't believe in divine intervention, you're talking to the wrong guy, because it was a miracle when I was in the 6th grade to start playing basketball. If you knew how many miracles has happened to me in the last 2 years, you wouldn't believe it. God has a purpose for us to be here. I was on the other internet the other day, and I had a player that I had's mother had passed away, and it came to me, what can you buy with 3 nails? Anybody? That's really a tough question. 3 nails are not very much. I will tell you that I learned from Coach Price this very thing. 3 nails gave us the opportunity to have eternal life. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donnie Bland, and I was on the last team. And I was blessed in a way that the guys who played for Coach Price never mentioned. And that was, he would pinch you. Now, when in my sophomore year, the longest I played any game until the 4th Region Championship game, it was less than 4 minutes. The first time I came off, because see, when you mess up, and Mark talking about that huddle, not only grab you in the chest, he would also pinch you and turn and pull. Y'all know what I'm talking about? They not mention that. That was a secret. So I messed up. I came off. He grabbed me and pinched. And instinctively, I knocked his hand off and ran to the end of the bench. So we had an understanding that year. If I mess up, I ain't coming to him. I just go to the end of the bench. And that worked. 69, let's recap a little bit about it. We played Ohio County. Got beat by 42 points, Franklin Gym. Then Louisville Central came. Louisville Central was a #1 team. Well, they won the state tournament in Kentucky that year, and they was voted at the end of the year the #1 team in the nation. They beat Houston Wheatley. They went like 45-0. Greatest team ever in Kentucky. Now, when Central came, they had Otto Petty and oh God, the forward. It'll come to me. Oh, I'm 70 now. Anyway, Otto Petty and King, they was playing. So they both went to Florida State. But anyway, Central beat us by 46 points. Well, we finished that season. We was 12-13. We had a losing season, really, before the tournament. Well, but the interesting thing about that tournament was everybody had a night where they stepped up. And so we would, being how we went as the districts went up, we had to beat the tournament champions in other districts. Well, Auburn ended up upset Bowling Green. They had the best team. So we was playing Auburn for the 1969 4th Region Championship game. Well, Auburn was killing us. So Coach Price looked down the bench, because I'm sitting at the end of the bench. I'm not getting no pinching. I only got one pinch. I can honestly say that. So I did real good on that. So he said at the time, and he told the Franklin Favorite later, that he sent me in with a hope and a prayer. And so that game, I came off the bench. I went in. I had 26 points and 15 rebounds, and we beat Auburn the first time we went to the state. But the thing that I most remember about Coach Price was, and during the years, he told me this one time, and it was really when I was in school. He said, thing about life, and this is what he taught me. He said, life is not fair, and people are not kind. You got to adjust, adapt, and keep on pushing. And I tell my congregation at church that. I never forgot that, especially during those times of integration. It was just turbulent times then, just like it is now. But I never forgot that. And it's so true, you know. And so with that, so what he meant for me was sending me in with a hope and a prayer. I answered the prayer by scoring the 26 points and getting 15 rebounds in the championship game. But he answered my hope because I'm glad to say that I'm a member of the Church of Christ and the pulpit minister of the Harristown Church of Christ. And that's my greatest reward in life, is being that within the church. And Coach Price and Coach Carver, too, both has been influential in me being where I'm at on that regard. Now, I'm going to tell you about 69. We had a losing season until we won the games. We go to the state. Now we 13-12. So the first game we drew, Shelby County. Shelby County wound up going to the semifinals. Believe it or not, the first half of that game, we was beating Shelby County, and they had about 2 or 3 guys that went to UK, Buzzy and a few others. But here's the thing. Herky Rupp was the coach of Shelby County, and we was leading about 4 points. So Adolph Rupp at the time came down out of the stands, called all the referees over there, and they had a chat. So we go down, halftime, come back out, leading by 4. We never got another call the rest of the game. So we lost to Shelby County. They made the finals. And then I was fortunate enough my senior year, we went back to the state and we played Anderson County, and Anderson County was runner-up. So, those teams, we had a shot, But Coach Price, like I say, the thing that about him was, in teaching me that life's not fair and people's not kind, it gave me the strength. And I pass it on to my congregation, and I tell people that's what you need, because what I learned from that is this. What you overcome in life is just as important as what you achieve in life. And what you overcome in life is just as important as what you accomplish in life. So that's what I learned from John Price, And Miss Jonelle, we love you, and she was always supporting me, and I was always running from that pinch. So them guys don't know. I was probably the smartest one because I just go to the end of the bench. That's where you're going anyway if you done messed up. Well, thank you so much.
I was just thinking as he was speaking, I was 30 or 40 years old before John Price called me Brent. Up to that point and onward, I was always Charlie Brown. And he let me go to those games and sit on the end of the bench. And Donnie, we might have been sitting next to each other. I don't know. I was a little 10-year-old guy. He was getting in the way. But thank you all. John was very active in his church here at Franklin Church of Christ, serving on several committees. He enjoyed being a lion on Franklin's Lions Club for 50 years. He held all officer and fundraising positions multiple times, most recently as president in 2013. He was also the recipient of the Melvin Jones and Phineas E. Davis Fellow Award. John and Jonelle were awarded lifetime membership by the club in 2020. They enjoyed transporting Simpson County residents to the Kentucky Lions Eye Foundation in Louisville, as well as to other out-of-town medical needs. Larry Smith comes to share about John's Lions Club work, followed by Steve Thurman, Bill Johnson, and Larry Dixon on the various ways that John touched their lives.
Well, thank you, Brent, for asking me to be here today. It's a real honor. As you said, John was a Lion for over 50 years. Served as president of the club 3 times, but his leadership in the club went way beyond just being a president. He was always a leader to us. In 1998, he was awarded the Melvin Jones. That's one of the highest honors your club can bestow on. And John definitely deserved it. 2020, we made John Jonelle lifetime members. Every year we have our pancake breakfast. I think this year is 67 years that will have had the annual pancake breakfast, which is a big fundraiser for the money we use to do service in the community. Well, as far as I know, as long as I can remember, John mixed the pancake batter. Well, we would go down on Friday afternoon and set up for the Saturday morning pancake breakfast. Well, John, if you didn't set everything exactly right for him to do that batter, you would hear it. I mean, it had to be just like he wanted it. And there's no telling how many pounds of pancake mix he mixed over the years. But he always did a good job of it. And he was always in the kitchen. There was always something going on with John. I mean, he was a character back there. He really was. Something I'd like to say about his service. John also had a real passion for service and helping others. For about 3 years, he and Joe Nell would take Bonnie Graves to the Lions Institute, Eye Institute at Louisville to have her eyes seen about. She had numerous surgeries, and a lot of the times would have to stay overnight. When they started taking her to Louisville, she could barely see to walk in anywhere, to walk in a restaurant. He would talk about him going to a restaurant. And they would have to order for her because she couldn't see the menu. She could barely walk in because her eyes were so bad. Well, after all her surgeries, all of her, everything they've done over those 3 years, about 3 years, John came back to the Alliance meeting one night and was telling, they had taken Bonnie to Louisville and that she was released. And we stopped at a restaurant on the way back, and Bonnie walked in, sat down at the table, and ordered her own supper, her own meal that night. Well, when John was telling that, he was almost in tears. But you could tell it really touched him that all the work that he and Joe Nell had done had paid off for this woman. And she had her eyesight again because of them. Another thing about that story is, of course, the surgeries, the care up there was paid for by the Kentucky Lions Eye Foundation. But the getting there, getting back, the food, staying there, doing all this, our club would offer to pay, for his expenses. And very seldom did he take it. Most of the time, he and Joe Nell paid for all this. But they totally changed one woman's life, definitely right there. And that's just one story of what that John had done serving people over the years. I'd like to tell a little story about John. Back in 2011, the Lions International decided they were going to help the environment and try to get every club in the world to plant trees. So our club, we worked on it, and I found some place we could get some trees, seedlings from the Kentucky Environmental Services for free, pine trees. So John volunteered to go get them. Well, he was concerned because we were getting 100 of them. So he was real concerned if his truck, he could get 100 trees in his truck. Well, he didn't realize these are seedlings. So when he got there, he was, they said Don Stevenson went with him also, and they were in there and planning on bringing out a forklift with all these big things of trees and everything, This woman came walking out with 2 bundles, about like this, wrapped in newspaper. It was 100 trees. Well, John and Don apparently just laughed. They couldn't even, just lost it all laughing so much. Well, when he got back, John called me and asked me to come over to the house to look at him and be sure that's what we were supposed to get. And I said, yeah, that's right, John. That's what it was, just seedlings. And he talked about that and laughed about that forever. But I do want to say we ended up planting 118 trees out of that. But I'd like to say that the Franklin Lions Club has lost a dear friend and a service-hearted man. And I feel we've all lost a friend and a very good man to this community. Thank you.
You can tell with my stature that I wasn't one of John's star basketball players. And just when I was just a little boy, I used to sit in my mother's lap and watch Mark Riggins play. and aspired to be like him. And he did a wonderful job of explaining things, Stretch. He was accurate on most things. What he didn't tell you was the very nice caps that he gave all of us, they aren't even close to what John made us wear. Do you know what a toboggan is? That's what we had to wear. We had to wear toboggans, not nice Franklin Simpson hats. And there's one pose, and this won't mean anything except to players that played for him, but there was one pose that I want you guys to look at and see if you remember. Because that was the pose that John, after he had said, all right, hit the blue line, that was the pose he took. And then he would have his whistle, and he would take his whistle off of his neck, and if you were close to him and he didn't think you were going fast enough, you would get the lanyard of that whistle across a part of you that you really didn't want to be hit. The reason I am here is not because I was a star basketball player, and that will be my brief story, and it will be brief, except I'm a Baptist, so that doesn't mean anything. When I was a freshman, I started playing basketball, and Howard Gray was actually the head freshman basketball coach. And I was getting to play, and I was scoring 4 points, something like that. And Coach Price was very nice. He'd come by me, and he'd say something nice to me about it. And one day after practice, at the end of the season, Coach Price says, Thurman, I want to see you in my office after practice. That is not something you wanted to hear. I didn't know whether I'd eaten popcorn, drunk a Coke, talked to a girl. I didn't know what I'd done. But I knew this was not good. So I go into his office. He said, sit down. And I sat down. He said, Thurman, you've got tremendous talent. And I thought, well, I may be a star Franklin Simpson basketball player here one of these days. He said, yep, Thurman, you've got tremendous talent. And I hope you go out there and find it somewhere, because it's certainly not basketball. To say that I was a little bit torn up about that, I was. But I got my revenge, because at Franklin Simpson High School, if you coached, you had to coach 2 sports. And John Price, who nobody has mentioned, but his nickname was John Run. That was what we called him, John Run. And he coached baseball with Carl Pike, whose nickname was Spanky, like in the Our Gang deal. So they got me in baseball, and I punished him throughout that because I played baseball for 4 years under John Price. So I got my revenge on him then. But the last story that I want to tell you, he was such an honest man, and that was what the deal was about. I hope you find your talent somewhere. So honest. But he was a hard worker, and he expected everybody else to be a hard worker. So the miniature golf course, it was the only arcade in Franklin. It had 2 machines in it, 2 pinball machines in it. So we hung out playing. One of them was a baseball pinball machine, and we played them there. So I was out there every night, I guess, checking out the girls. And one day he said, Thurman, would you like a job? I said, yes, sir, that'd be great. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a job, and I'll let you play all the miniature golf you want to play. I said, done, coach. Sign me up. He said, what I want you to do is trim around all of the miniature golf course holes. There were 18 of them. Do y'all know how many turns there are around a miniature golf course? And I said, oh, okay, coach, what am I going to use? He brought out a pair of scissors about this long. You've seen them, and that is what I trimmed around 18 holes of miniature golf with. But I will tell you this, everything everybody has said about John Price is true. The good, the bad, everything they've said is true. But I will tell you this, there's not a one of us that played baseball for him or played basketball for him or had him as a teacher or a principal. And even in my case, I spent a few years with Nancy Kerner working with him at Franklin Insurance. There's not a one of us who is not a better person because we had the experience of being with John Price.
I'm Bill Johnson. I first met Coach John Price in
the summer of 1972. I was fresh out of graduating from Middle Tennessee, and I'd heard a lot about John Price and his legendary times of playing basketball there, but I never had met him until this one summer afternoon there when I came here to interview for a job as assistant football coach. And that went extremely well, and some way or another, with the Lord's blessings and a lot of luck, I was hired for the job. Second game of the season that year, we were playing at a neighboring rival on the road, and my job during the games were to be the spotter up in either in or on the press box. And so we finished with our warm-ups, and I go up to get on top of the press box, and one of the officials from this particular place that we were playing was denying me access to get up there. So, being young and everything else and not wanting to create a stink, I turned and started on back down to the field. Well, John was nearby, sitting over there, him being the athletic director. And he came over there and he said, "Coach, what's wrong?" I said, "Coach Price," I said, "they're denying me access to get up on the press box." And he said, "You wait right here a minute." So he goes up to the press box, and this gentleman, he motions for him to come over, and they're standing there. And John, I don't know what was said, never did know, and he never did tell me, but after they finished their conversation, he came back over to where I was. He said, "Coach, get on up there on the press box and do your job, and good luck." So on Monday, I went by his office there at school, in the high school office, and I said, "Coach Price," I said, "I want to thank you for helping me out prior to the game, getting on the press box Friday night." And he acknowledged me thanking him, and he said, "Coach," he said, "to be honest with you," he said, "I knew when we hired you, you being an old country boy from Macon County, Tennessee, you was going to need a lot of help." So One other quick story. You mentioned, Steve, I think, mentioned the fact of John's nickname of Run. He had another nickname, and this was within a small group of friends that developed, that there was a tradition amongst former and current coaches and school officials, etc., that in the spring, about the time school would be let out, we would Don Stevenson had a cabin, they called it, which was like a really nice house, but Don would have everybody over for a weekend retreat. Well, part of the tradition was that Don went and got huge steaks. I mean, I can't describe them, how big and all they were, and Don would grill the steaks. Well, John always wanted to fix the baked potatoes, and he would get the awfulest bunch of potatoes. I mean, they would be 10 or 12 of us guys there. He'd probably put 20, get them fixed and put them in the oven for baked potatoes. And he did that on purpose because the next morning, that was for our Saturday night meal. Well, on Sunday morning, John always would get up and to fix breakfast, and he would take those potatoes and cut them up, mash them up, and mix them in with eggs, and we had eggy-taters. So we had always called him eggy-taters amongst that group of people, but that would go a long ways, and some of you here would remember that time. I had a lot of fun with that too. And it was mentioned that of all the things that John had done and everything that he went at, he went at full force, and he was very dedicated at everything that he went about. That's all of the things that's been said was to that. There was one thing, and I don't know why that this sticks out in my mind, but one thing that hasn't been mentioned was, beside the things all that John loved his farm, and he loved
his and Jonelle's farm. He loved Mr. and Miss Stahl's farm. And all of his working life, he would work hard all week. Of course, a lot of times at nights when he was coaching and in school business and all, but it never failed for many, many years. Early on Saturday morning, John and Jonelle was in that pickup truck. They went to the farm. They were there all day long, probably darker after on Saturday night when they would get back home. And I don't know, that always stuck with me too about, his work ethic and hard work. And Brent, I too was one of the fortunate ones that he kept up with, and for many, many years, wherever I was, he would call and check on me. And to say that if you had John Price as a friend, the good Lord had blessed you because he was as good as the good Lord could bless you with. And I'm honored to be able to have a few words to say in his honor, and I thank him for the memories and all the things that he has meant to each of us here. And he naturally will be missed. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the family for giving me the opportunity to come and say just a few words about John Price. And I have to say Jonelle. I'll probably use John and Jonelle somewhat in the things that I have to say, because they both have meant so much to Donna and I in many, many ways. But I just want to I want to go ahead and say that I did not play basketball for John. I was not one of the fortunate ones to be able to have the opportunity to do that. I wish I had. I might have learned more discipline than I have learned over the years. But again, John and Jonelle, they are great people. Donna and I have been fortunate to have them as neighbors for over 40 years. I live just right over here, and John and Jonelle lived right over there. So I was fortunate enough to be able to be in their home many times and visit with them and hear some of the stories that have been shared with us today. I would be amiss if I didn't mention Jay Ackerson. Jay Ackerson was a really, really close friend of John's. And I heard between John, being a neighbor to John and Jonelle, and knowing Jay Ackerson, I had the opportunity to hear many, many good basketball stories. And I think those two people probably love basketball better than anybody that I know. They love to talk about basketball. I want to share a story. When I talked to Lou said we'd share a story or whatever. I do want to, I could not go without, and it's not been mentioned, but one time today, I could not go without mentioning how much that John and Joe love dogs. That we all of us here that know them know how much they love dogs. Well, we had a dog named Benji. And she was a beagle hound, and Benji had gotten a little age on her, and they had lost Peaches. How many of you here remember their dog named Peaches? And that really, really was detrimental to them, because they really loved Peaches. So, and after they lost Peaches, somehow or the other, John managed to be able to coach our little beagle hound up on the hill. And then when she got up on the hill, he could coach her on over to the house. Well, Benji was always at home at night. She had the freedom to run around the neighborhood here, but never ran out to the road or anything like that. So we got to missing Benji at night and wondering where Benji was. Well, come to find out, John had made a trap door in his garage, and Benji had been going over visiting with them, and they were giving her treats, and Benji wound up to be their dog at night and our dog in the daytime. So I just had to share that story. I know Jonelle remembers that, but and one other short thing. I know I don't want to belabor anything, but speaking of talking about John playing tricks. I had a clothing store right down here on the square, and I hadn't had it too long until I had my heating unit went out. Well, I had insurance with Howard and John. And my brother-in-law, Don Drake, plays a little bit of a role in this, and he was a prankster also. So I had him to come work on it and fix it, and Don thought, he said, he said insurance might cover some of this. So in the meantime, Don goes down and talks to John and Howard, and Elaine might remember this. I don't know if they ever told her or not. But it was a fairly expensive job to be done. So they went down and talked to John and Howard, and I was in the store that day, and so they called, and one of them called. I don't remember if it was John or Howard. I think it was John called and said, you're just not covered under insurance for this project that you're having problems with. And come to find out, a little later on, and it really got to me. I thought, I don't know where I'm going to come up with all the money to take care of this without my insurance helping me out. So a little later on, one of them called and they said, well, we were just really joking with you, but you're covered with insurance. So but I never ever forgot that. I never forgot that incident. But that's just a couple of stories that I can share. But I want to say this in closing. Knowing Jonelle and John Price, I'm a better person of having had the privilege of knowing John and Jonelle. I'm a better person for it. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here and say a few words to you all. The whole Price family, I have been fortunate enough to become friends with a lot of them. And the Price family is such a fine family. And I thank all of you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Bill Johnson reminded me with the stake. A lot of John's memorabilia came my way, and I started going through it. I went through an envelope just the other day and found some newspaper clippings where he talked about his recruiting at Middle Tennessee. And he said it was the first time in his life he ever had a steak, and that was the highlight of his recruiting. And the other thing, you guys are talking about this mean old guy that I don't know. I was a 10-year-old that, thought he was something special. This mean old guy kept every letter and telegram that was sent to him from winning the region tournament in 1969. It was all in an envelope and all right there. So it all had a soft part. He had a soft part in his heart. John Price is survived by the love of his life of 67 years, his wife, Jonelle Stahl Price, as well as siblings Terry Price and Betty Jane Proctor. Betty Jane is over here, and Donald Proctor is over here, and Laura is representing Terry, and we're thankful that you guys could be with us. Also, my mother, his sister-in-law, Jean Price, and several nephews and nieces, as you've seen. Also, his caregivers, Jane Sullivan, Sharia Hawkins, and Maggie Cheney. John, we talked about discipline earlier. He planned for his life. He made plans for his and Jonelle's ongoing care, and he asked his nieces, Lou Beckner and Karen Tabor Ramsey, to manage his health care and finances. I just want to take a moment to recognize their commitment and love to unquestionable caring for John and Joe and always meeting their needs. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Pastor Steve Kirby for their closing.
Wow. What a wonderful way to celebrate Mr. John's life. by having so many kind words and stories shared about him with all of us. It shows a lot about a person when you have so many individuals speak so highly of you. I was sitting here, I didn't play a lot of sports. My son's playing sports, and Eli over here is our youth minister. He's a coach for the middle school football team and baseball team. And I think about how spoiled our kids are today not to have a coach like John Price. Eli, maybe you can start pinching some kids. You can pinch my son anytime you want. But they shared so many different things about Mr. John Leonard Price. And I had a lot of these on my things too, but I knew I was going to have to mark several things out. One thing that was highlighted, they talked about him scoring those 36 points. I kind of Googled Mr. John and MTSU basketball. If you go on Wikipedia, he's still top 10 with that 36 points of most points scored in a college basketball game there at Middle Tennessee State. They talked about all of his different things of him teaching, his basketball Hall of Fame there at MTSU, coming back home to Kentucky to coach. After teaching, having that career in the insurance agency. They talked about his church, and right here at his church, like they said, he was very active and he was on several committees. And one of his passions here at the church building sits right over here to your left, my right, with our houses behind the annex called the Dawson property. We have 7 widowed ladies living in that property, and we've had several ladies and men live in those homes over the years, and Mr. John was on that committee for many years helping that be established. He also helped a little bit with this building committee here when this building was built back in the early 2000s. And also he was a trusted trustee for many years here for our church. They talked about his Lions Club commitment and then their enjoyment of dogs and adopted. And those dogs were adopted by the church because they'd come over and visit us every once in a while at the back door. And I missed him walking around because they were our neighbors as well, living back here, as Mr. Larry said. And I come to find out that Pumpkin is still alive and walking around and doing well. They had many canine friends over the years. I'd like to read a passage from Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You know, in my visits over the many years, he would talk about his love for Miss Joan Nail, the love for animals. They love both so much, and like I said, I enjoy seeing them walk around and taking care of their property here close to the church building. I enjoyed some of the stories that he shared with me about the farm, about his coaching career and everything else. And someone also mentioned that I kind of hated to go see Mr. John every once in a while because he would have that handshake out there, and I ain't no telling how many times I thought my hand was going to break. He was a very, very strong man, physically and spiritually. And that leads me to this, that what I can share about Mr. John was that he loved his church family. He loved his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And there weren't too many Sundays that went by without Mr. John and Miss Joan Nail in their pew sitting. And if we noticed that they'd been gone for a Sunday or two, we knew something was amiss, and we'd go around and check on them. Both loved their church and enjoyed all things church they could do. I especially remember Mr. John and Joan Nail loved the Senior Saints banquet that was held annually here at church. And every time they would come dressed up to the event, you see the Senior Saints event, they made it a themed event. And a lot of the older people would come and be dressed up that evening and enjoy the evening. We'd also recognize a king and queen. Well, John and Joan Nail were recognized as king and queen in 1999 when the theme was A Night at the Opry. And I tried to look back and see what they was dressed up as. I think Miss Jonelle was dressed up as Minnie Pearl, if I remember. I can't remember what Mr. John was dressed up, but I know I remember trying to ask them, since they were king and queen, to sing some country songs, and they declined that very quick. He was a special man. Like he said, he loved his family, his church family, and his community. So through all those memories, we can take comfort in a few things. We can take comfort today because I know that Mr. John talked to the Lord. And I feel today that he is in the presence of the Lord. And Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Today we can take good comfort in knowing that. And we can think of the passage in John 14, 1 through 6. Let your heart not be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And then I'll skip down to verse 6. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And these comforting words given by Jesus to his disciples in turn should comfort us. We receive comfort when we realize there is a home in 2 Corinthians 5 and 6 through 8, saying, knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith and not by sight. We are confident. Yes, we are pleased rather to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. You know, this home speaks of God's provision. There is room for each of us. A weary traveler's dreaded sign when he goes along is no vacancy, but that is not true with our home in heaven. There's always room in his house, and this speaks of God's care for his own. Thirdly, we receive comfort in knowing that Jesus is returning for all of us, because Jesus says that if I go, I will return. And we detest sometimes saying goodbye because it means that the event might be over. We say things like, I'll see you later, or we'll do this again. But we know that it is not always a certainty. Plans change, lives turn, but Jesus says, I will return. And this speaks of his love for us, and this speaks of our value to him. And we receive comfort also in knowing that we have that destination. Back again, Thomas, upon hearing that Jesus was leaving, was anxious. He asked, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How do we know the way? And as I already read there in John 14 and 6, he said 3 words to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And the way is, Jesus is the path to follow. Mr. John followed that path in 1945 when he followed the plan of salvation put on forth through God's wonderful word by hearing the gospel of Christ, believing in Jesus Christ, repenting of his sins, confessing faith in Jesus, and being baptized into Christ. And then after that, all these faithful years, he lived faithful unto death, Revelation 2:10. The truth is, there are no shadows when it comes to following God's way. Jesus is the truth. And when Jesus says he loves us, he does. And when Jesus says he will return for us, like we said, he is going to return for us. And the life that is talked about is also talked about in Psalms 90, where it says, a life is made up of 70 years, 80 if there is strength. Well, Mr. John was 90 years young. He had a great life in service to his Heavenly Father and Savior, and he would want you to do the same as well. We've heard the life of him being a great man, great teacher, great husband. And one of my favorite things I like to do in services for someone that I've had the pleasure to speak for is find a poem. And I found a poem, and it's entitled Coach. Your dedication and direction has put fire in our souls. You have inspired us to do the best to reach our goals. Your lessons will be remembered long after the game is won. For the lessons you have taught us have only just begun. You've taught us about commitment, perseverance, and hope. And as we go through life, we'll be better able to cope. To cope with all our struggles, our failures, and success, because we had you for our coach. You're one of the best. Thank you, Coach. Let's pray. Dear Father, we thank you again for this day. We thank you for the life of Mr. John Price and what he means to all of us. We will miss him dearly, and we thank you for all the memories that has been shared today, and let us hold on to those memories as we go out through life. Let us share those memories with others, and let us understand what they mean to us. We thank you so much for his service to his family, his community, and his church family, dear Father, and his service to you. And we know that you're holding him tight, and that he is holding you tight as well, dear Father. Thank you for his life, and thank you for your son's life through all this is made possible. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Before Eli comes and leads us in our closing song, I'd like for you to turn over on the back of your program and just let you know there is a graveside service that will follow here after the funeral service is over at Fairview Cemetery in Bowling Green. There's no formal procession that is going up there. We just ask that you meet at the cemetery following the funeral. Thank you.
If you would, open up your songbooks again to number 530. 530. We're going to sing verses 1, 2, 5, and 6. 1, 2, 5, and 6 of number 530. Peace, perfect peace. Peace, perfect peace, in this dark world of sin. The blood of Jesus whispers peace within. Peace, perfect peace, by thronging duties press, to do the will of Jesus. This is rest. Peace, perfect peace, our future all unknown. Jesus we know, and he is on the throne. It is enough, her struggle soon shall cease, and Jesus call us to have